Welcome to another episode in the series of Social Cohesion in Action. I am your host today, Shabir Ali, Liaison Officer, Department of Social Cohesion within the Ministry of the Presidency. Our guest today is Mr. Will Campbell, a psychologist by profession and a lecturer at the University of Guyana. Mr. Campbell, welcome to another series, Social Cohesion in Action.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Ali.
Thank you. Today we want to discuss critical areas, some critical subject points. And today we'll be dealing with fear, respect, tolerance, and acceptance, adapting to the new norm. You know, this is the period of COVID-19 and all the challenges we're dealing with. And I believe that these are critical areas that we can give tools to people to cope. So how do you, Mr. Campbell, in your own terms, explain so that the man in the street can understand fear?
Okay. Fear is an emotion. It's a normal human emotion, but it's usually, it's an unpleasant emotion that is aroused when you face a perceived threat. So if you feel like your safety is threatened, your well-being is threatened, then you experience this unpleasant emotion, which is called fear. So it is an emotion, it is a normal emotion, and it is a response, the way we respond to a perceived threat. I think it is important to note that what might be a threat for you may not be perceived as a threat for me, or vice versa. For example, I might be afraid of spiders, and you're quite okay with that. So for me, it's a threat, but for you, it isn't. So your response when you see a spider will obviously then be different from my response. So not everyone responds in the same way to fear, and not everyone's fear is triggered by the same threat.
So can I safely say that our level of fear varies based on individual?
Yes.
All right. And how do you see fear interfere with our relationship in society?
All right. So the way we interact with people has a lot to do with what we have been taught, or what we've come to believe, etc., etc. And we have a tendency as human beings to be afraid of anything that we do not understand, anything that we are not familiar with, anything that we can't control, we're afraid of. And so sometimes when people come into contact with people whom they perceive to be different, if they don't understand those differences, then the response is one of fear. They're afraid of those persons, and so they would either distance themselves from that person, they would withdraw from those persons whom they perceive to be different, or they could become aggressive in their effort to eliminate what they perceive to be a threat, or what their brain perceives to be a threat. So if I'm afraid of you, my interaction with you will be different from if I'm comfortable with you. So fear, and let us use it in the context of diversity and differences. If I move into a neighborhood, for example, and the people there are different from me in some way, maybe they don't look like me, or maybe they don't worship like me, or they don't talk like me, I'm a little uncomfortable because they're different. And if I've never learned to accommodate those differences, then it is quite possible that I'm going to be afraid of those people. I'm afraid of them, and so I could become aggressive, or I might withdraw myself from them.
Thank you very much. If I'm to ask me, I hope the intention is not to sound derogatory to people, but our ethnic composition. We have 6 races in Guyana, but do you think our ethnicity has to do something with fear, or like people say, okay, the Amerindians don't fear the bush; they can walk through the bush. A coastlander might fear it. But you think from that background, our ethnicity has something to do with fear?
Yeah, I think that probably the basis of interactional dysfunction, relationship dysfunction, is fear. So if I don't understand you, if I can't control you, and then I become afraid of you, then it is going to definitely affect the way I deal with you. And I think we have had a history of sometimes outsiders, and then that is passed down from generation to generation, of being told to be afraid of the other. So anybody who is different, we're told that you must be afraid of them. I'm going to make a statement here. I don't hope
Sure.
I don't get into too much trouble. One of the things I heard growing up is the only colleague you trust is a dead one, for example. So obviously, I'm afraid
of that
I
race.
was taught to be afraid of Indian people, not in the home, but I learned that in my interactions with society. So that, of course, if that is what you're bombarded with, then you develop a fear for people who are different, and so your response to those persons will necessarily be, triggered by that fear. So one of the reasons we have ethnic problems is because we were taught to be afraid of each other.
And we grow with that.
And we grow with that. And unless, that is reversed either through education, I like to say direct education, because some people feel like I go to school, I get a degree, I mix with people of all races, that somehow that is going to be erased automatically. I believe that because it has become cultural for us, it has become a way of life, the education can't be incidental for most of us. It has to be direct. And so we have to pretty much go into communities and have people discuss these issues.
I agree.
And you educate them, and we learn about one another. And when we learn that those differences are not frightening, that's when we are able to interact with each other. So when I learned that, my Indian friends, I don't have to, not all Indians are untrustworthy, just like not all blacks are untrustworthy. Then my response to people who are of a different ethnicity becomes different. And so the learning or the unlearning has to be intentional and very direct.
I like the point that going back to the community and engage people directly.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's something we need to.
It's a community problem, really.
Yes, yes.
It is taught in some homes, but even in homes where fear of the other is not taught, you have people from those homes coming out and interacting with community. And remember, community also impacts our learning. We learn things outside of the home as well.
Exactly. All right, so we've touched on fear. Let's look at about in terms of respect. How do you explain respect that people can understand?
All right, I think, let me try to give a working definition. Respect is an appreciation for the value of another person. All right, you might find the definition a little different in the dictionary, but it is me appreciating the fact and acknowledging the fact that you have just as much value as I do. That's when I respect you. I want to mention also, I think it's important, that society has taught us, has misinformed us, miseducated us about this whole issue of respect. One of the things that society taught us is that a person must earn respect. And that you don't have to respect people who you perceive to be at a lower socioeconomic level than you, and you respect people, who have some higher status than you. Those things are incorrect. Those things are incorrect. Everyone has value, whether that person recognizes their own value or worth or not, whether that person behaves as though they have value or not. That person has value. And so, as one human being to another, I should acknowledge and appreciate the fact that this is someone of value. And so I am obligated, I believe, as a human being, to respect all people, everyone, regardless of whether the person behaves in a manner that commands that respect or not. And I think that if we learn to do that, and if we unlearn what society has taught us, that people have to behave a certain way in order for us to respect them, it is going to change a lot of things. I want to say something else on respect.
Sure.
And that is that respect for others really starts with respect for self.
I agree.
Respect for others really starts with respect for self. And one of the misconceptions we have is that we need to make people respect us, whereas what we need, and that we it's important for others to respect us. And so we go around the place looking for, doing things to make people respect us. Some of us get into conflicts, sometimes physical conflicts, looking for respect. But you don't need everybody else's respect. Although it feels nice to be respected by other people, our brain does not need that. What our brain needs is for us to appreciate our own value and our own worth. And it's a strange thing. When you appreciate your own value and your own worth, then you it becomes automatic that you see value and worth in other people. And you start respecting those people. And, most people, I would say 9 out of 10 persons, if you treat them with respect, they eventually reciprocate. It doesn't always come overnight. But if you consistently treat people with respect, after a while, something in their brain says, you know what, I should return this respect to that person. But remember, that starts with respect for self.
Self.
We don't learn that. That is not what society teaches us. But that is a reality.
I just want to share. I grew up in the country. And in those days, you had to respect every man jack in the community, regardless if they look like you or don't look like you.
Absolutely.
And I remember calling people in my village, there was only one Negro family. And you had to call them full mouth auntie and uncle.
Yes.
And my grandfather had people in those days had saw bodies, not chainsaw, used to cut wood with the saw pit. And you had to refer to them as uncle and aunt. You couldn't, that respect was there,
Yes.
And I'm glad you mentioned.
It didn't matter who that person was. You had to be respectful. One of the things, and as a little aside, your parents may have had conflict with a neighbor, but as a child, you could not get involved in that conflict.
That is true.
Still required to show respect to that person.
They said leave the big people and keep it thrown out.
Yes.
I remember that term. And I'm glad you mentioned values, because I had wanted to touch on that. Our value system varies with individuals. And that's something we need to maybe work on in society. Sometimes we value the wrong set of things. And that can lead to disrespecting people. The other two key words, Mr. Campbell, tolerance and acceptance. How do you explain it to the man in the street, the ordinary person, the people who will be watching this program in the hinterland can understand?
Right. Tolerance and acceptance are sometimes used interchangeably. And I'm not sure that I have the right words to show the distinction between the two. So I'll probably use it interchangeably too. But I believe that tolerance is where you don't necessarily believe or agree with something, but you allow it because you recognize the other person's right to it. Acceptance is more you acknowledging that right and finding a way to agree with it. So I don't have to tolerate you if I agree with you. I can accept you. But if I don't agree with you, then I need to exercise a level of tolerance.
So you don't avoid the conflicts.
So I don't have conflict. So I reduce the conflict.
You reduce the conflict, yes.
May I respond to something you said earlier about value systems,
Yeah, sure.
differences in value systems? I believe that there are some values that are universal. But then but who is to say what values are good values and what values are bad values outside of those? And sometimes we judge people because their value system is a little different from ours. And we have conflict there. There's fear there, and it is difficult to accept or tolerate people when you decide that there is something wrong with their values.
I want to divert a little bit since you come back to values. How do you see religion plays a part in value?
Good question. Now, a large part of our value system is determined by our religion, or lack thereof. And let us suppose that somebody is irreligious. Is that a word? Let us suppose that somebody, does not embrace any form of religion, but I am very religious. If I decide that because I am religious, I somehow, my life has more value, and my life has more importance, and my life has more relevance than this other person, you can see right away that there's going to be a lack of respect for that other person. So I need to understand that the fact that somebody does not believe as I do, we're talking here about religion, that person might not believe as I do, that person might not worship as I do. That person has a right to believe or not believe what they choose. And I do not have a right to determine that somehow that is inferior. You know, I could have a discussion with you and share with you what my beliefs are. I could even try to persuade you to believe what I believe. But at the end of the day, whatever decision you make should be okay with me, so long as that decision doesn't trample on my rights or the rights of other people. So people have a right to believe, to participate in whatever religion they please, as long as they don't trample on the rights of other people. So religion should not separate us. We should be able to live with others in spite of religious differences.
So again, you come back to tolerance again.
Yes.
Yes. Sorry, you were making a point.
No, go ahead.
Yes, I'd come back in the level of our tolerance. How do I tolerate you as a Hindu or a Christian or a Rasta or you know, and then come back to respect again also.
All right, so let's talk about the tolerance thing. I think it becomes easier to tolerate people when you understand why they do what they do. You understand why they're doing what they're doing, then it becomes more tolerable. It reminds me of an experience I had with someone who has Tourette syndrome. This is a disorder that causes people to make sudden noises. You know, they just make these sudden noises, and it could be irritating for the person who doesn't understand. So there was this young lady sitting, I don't recall whether it was a bus or a train, and she was making these sounds randomly, making these sudden sounds, and it became a little irritating for me. And later, I was talking to someone else about it, and the person said, she probably has Tourette's syndrome. And Tourette's syndrome, you can't help yourself. You just have these.
Make the sound.
Now, understanding why she was doing what she was doing made it different. So the next time I experienced somebody with Tourette's syndrome, my response, my internal response to that person was different. Let's bring this back to tolerance and religion. If I see you performing religious rites, maybe, and I seek to learn about your religion and why you do the things you do, at the end of the day, whether I agree with you or not, that understanding of why you are doing it makes it easier for me to accept or at least tolerate what you're doing. You understand? So I'm no longer afraid. So if you're Hindu and you have Jandi next door, I don't even know if I'm saying the right thing. I don't have to be afraid when you offer me the sweet treats anymore, because I know you didn't owe me anything. I don't have to be afraid.
It eliminates your fears.
It eliminates the fear, the understanding, the knowledge. And so I believe that the answer to fear in relation to our interactions with others is to seek understanding. And if we can learn about each other. Now, I don't know a whole lot about Hinduism. I know more than I did a few years ago, or about Islam or about other religions. I have found that when I talk to people who practice these religions, I am better able to understand why they're doing what they're doing. I am better able to relate to them, and I don't have to feel uncomfortable with them anymore. So understanding, I believe, is the answer. It helps us to tolerate, it helps us to accept, it heals division, it helps us to come together and be able to work together. And one of the things about seeking to understand people is you discover that you're not that different after all.
Thank you very much. Mr. Campbell, how do we use these, if you want to say, feelings or emotion, the ones that we've just talked about, to build better relationships with people and our community at large?
Let me start with the issue of respect. I think that we have to start there. We have to start respecting ourselves, acknowledging that we have worth, personally and collectively, that we have worth and that we have value. When that happens, we transmit that acknowledgement of worth and value to others, and including those we consider other, people who are in a different social group than you, whether that group is a racial group or a religious group or, even gender. When we acknowledge our worth, when we understand our worth, when we value ourselves, we automatically learn to ascribe value to other people as well. And so that is why respect is so important. So I may not agree with your perspective, I may not agree with your viewpoint, I may not agree with a lot of things about you, but I respect your right to hold those views, to hold those perspectives. That eliminates a whole lot of conflict. Understanding, again, helps to eliminate fear and increase acceptance and improve our ability to tolerate those whom we cannot maybe accept. I think is a step
Step by step.
So we tolerate and then we maybe learn to accept. And there are some things that you probably will never be able to accept, and that is okay.
I agree.
That is perfectly okay. I'm Christian. I may never accept Hinduism as my religion, and that is okay. But I should be able to also tolerate my Hindu brother, my Hindu sister, and understand that they have a right to that. So we have to learn respect. We have to learn tolerance. And we have to eliminate fear by increasing understanding. I want to urge our listeners, the next time you come across somebody that you are afraid of, instead of withdrawing, by the way, there are some people that you have a legitimate right to be afraid of, legitimate reason to be afraid of. But if that fear comes just out of not knowing, then try to learn about that person. Seek to understand why that person is the way he or she is, and see how different your response to that person will be. So instead of allowing these fears to grow, because by the way, if I'm afraid of you because you're different, I'm going to see a whole lot of other differences, because then that becomes my focus. And all I see when I see you is the fact that we are so different. And all the little things, even those that are insignificant, become amplified. And, the more differences I see, the more fearful I become, the more aggressive or the more withdrawn I will become. And I want to say one more thing on this.
Sure.
When we don't accept people, we rob ourselves of opportunities to learn a different perspective, a different viewpoint. And so we have to be open-minded. We have to be open-minded about it.
Thank you very much. Two things quickly. I know we're coming down to the end of time. Two things quickly I want to touch on. What are some of the factors that triggers these feelings?
Well, let me see if I can go back here. Fear of a lack of understanding or a lack of familiarity. So that is what brings fear. Respect, like we mentioned earlier, comes out of an understanding of your own self, an acceptance of your own self, because if I can't respect me, then there is no way I can respect you. I might be afraid of you. And so I treat you in ways that are respectful, but that is not respect really. I only do it because I'm afraid. What happens when that fear goes away? Then I don't feel like I have to respect you anymore. It's like a lot of children, they're afraid of their parents. And then they get broader shoulders than their father, and he can't knock them no more.
Sometimes they're afraid of the parents when they're in front of the parents, and behind the parents' back is always
right. So when there's no need to fear, then that quote-unquote respect disappears. So the respect comes when we learn to respect ourselves, and then we respect people. Tolerance and acceptance, again, those come with understanding. Those are triggered by understanding and by knowledge and by respect too. You know, I respect your right to do what you're doing, so I don't like it, but I'm tolerating it because I understand that you have that right. So I can, you know, so a lot of these things that we're taught, these attributes we're talking about, come about intentionally. And we started by saying that the education has to be intentional. So I'm not suddenly going to accept you or tolerate you. I have to do something about it in order to move from a place of fear and move to a position of tolerance and acceptance.
Mr. Campbell, the last point you want to discuss, we have talked a lot on fear, respect, and tolerance. What are the dangers of not having these emotions in our daily lives?
Not having these emotions. Let me start with fear because that's a little more complex. Fear is an important emotion. It is important to respond to threats, to real threats. So not having any fear, could put you in danger when you're faced with a real threat. However, when we're dealing with people in terms of our differences, we don't need that kind of fear because that in that case, fear is destructive. With regard to tolerance and respect, there is this perception among a lot of us that if we are too respectful of certain people, they're going to walk all over us. But there really is no way to be too respectful to someone. You can be respectful to someone even if that person doesn't respect you. In that case, what you need is assertiveness so that you're able to establish boundaries so that person knows, they can come thus far and no further. So I don't need to withdraw my respect from you. All I need to do is to be assertive with you so that I can tell you plainly, look, I'm not appreciative of what you're doing. I need you to stop or whatever in that case. But I do not have to withdraw my respect. So we don't need to, there's no way to be too respectful. So we must have respect. It is important that we maintain respect for everyone, regardless of what we feel to that person. Not being tolerant and not being accepting of people will bring conflict. Those, not having those attributes will alienate us from other people. People that we could maybe benefit from interaction with, we alienate those people because we can't tolerate them, we can't accept them, we push them aside. And we rob ourselves of the benefits that would have come from gaining a different perspective from someone who is different. So it's important for us to be respectful. It's important for us to learn tolerance. And it's important for us to learn to accept people, even if we perceive that those persons are different from us.
We have come to the end of this episode. Today we'd have had Mr. Will Campbell with us. Do join us again for the next episode of Social Cohesion in Action.